in both Mists and Necrotic Wake, the first 2 dungeons of this series. Now, not surprisingly, Team Name does have a pretty similar time in Necrotic Wake, so Perplexed hesitates or missteps a little bit there. We could see them take a game off, but we have to see how this Mist goes first.
That's right. Game number 1 here in our upper finals. We've got Perplexed and Team Name starting us off on Championship Sunday.
All right, so we got mirror comps coming in from both of these sides. I'm interested to see how Team Name is going to do their first pull, because we saw from Perplexed yesterday, we know that they save their Ashen Hollow, and they like to save a lot of their offensive CDs for that boss, so they are able to one-phase it, where we've seen some other teams across the weekend burning that Ashen Hollow on this first pull, and it looks like Igloo, and on the side of Team Name, has elected to save that Ashen Hollow. They're going to be looking to one-phase Ingram Malok, which can be a substantial time save.
Yeah, I think it is possible with this composition. You know, you've got quite a lot of heavy burst damage, even though you don't have necessarily some of the highest single target damage specs in the game in your group. They do have pretty burst oriented damage, which means during that 15-second burn window, they can actually deal a lot of damage to the boss. And I mean, credit to Team Name here. They are pulling the exact same thing that Perplexed is and making that work. And I think there's a good chance that this is, something that they've picked up since Perplexed did it earlier this weekend, right? I think that's the kind of thing where, you look at what they're doing and you're like, oh, that's that's better than what we had. All right, let's try that. But it's not as simple as that, right? Because this is really, really tough. There's a lot of ways that pulls this size can wipe you. And Team Name, I mean, they are keeping up here. They're about 5 seconds slower on finishing off this pull, so certainly not an insurmountable advantage to Perplexed. But Perplexed do get to pull the boss first, so they've already got a little bit of a lead here.
Yeah, in addition to that, you do have things. There are many kicks that are in that first pack. There's double Harvester and Incinerator Arcoleth there, which, if any of those casts go off, you can start to run into a heap of trouble. So both of those teams are able to get that pack dealt with pretty quickly onto the first boss. And you see something that's really important is both groups are DPSing Ingram Malok first before starting to commit more and more damage to Droman. And that's something that... So Droman, or Ingram Malok does end up becoming almost, 90% damage reduction? Is it 70? There's a massive damage reduction that happens on 80%. Ingram Malok. Yeah, and they just hit the boss until that damage reduction of 80% occurs, and then they will start pushing Droman. It makes the healing required on this boss a lot more difficult, but at the same time, it almost ensures the one phase to be able to be doable.
All right, here we go. Let's see if they can do this. Both teams have Ingram Malok around 85% as they're both getting close to pushing that tree. Once it reaches that 20% mark, it does turn friendly and help us out attacking Ingram Malok here. And that's going to happen for Perplexed right now. There goes the Ashen Hallow. Every single cooldown that they have is coming out here, and they are trying to deal just as much damage as they possibly can. We need to see Ingram Malok getting below 20% ideally to be able to kill it rather than having to kill the tree again. And wow, they've done it.
Oh, look at
some
Perplexed.
Despair.
Yeah.
Team Name though also, oh my goodness, Team Name have got it lower.
They're catching up. Okay, so this is going to be almost identical timing on the kill, where it looks like Perplex had just a little bit more boss damage coming into that initial burn. Team Name, with their... They committed more to Ingram Malok during that first little bit, and they're able to get the first boss down with a few seconds to spare over that of Perplexed.
2-second advantage to the underdogs here. Team Name with a fantastic boss one split as they move to the maze section. Now the maze, the teams don't know what it's going to be ahead of time, but it is the same between the two teams. So that isn't going to... I mean, it is going to throw a wrench in their plans, but it's not going to throw a wrench in the relative times of these two different dungeons they're running, right?
Yeah, it's very difficult because there are some routes in the dungeons that vary how you're going to be pulling. There are things like the dragon mini boss. It ends up costing you a lot more time just as a whole on the runs. So you will see the variance between runs to runs across the teams. Sometimes we saw even a 2-minute disparity between a group that got the Hydra versus a team that got the dragon, but at the same time, for competitive integrity purposes, they are the same maze.
Right, yeah, that's exactly what we're going for here, as Perplexed do manage to pull some trash over the wall, as do Team Name. They have the right-hand path here, and they actually grab the trash out of the room they were about to go to, which means they just get to go straight to that next room. So they are now 2 maze walls down in that third room. Both teams getting started on this pull. Perplexed have pulled ahead once again. They are about a third of a trash pull in the lead at this point. So even though they had a slightly slower boss 1 split, they were able to just leverage a little bit more damage onto that previous trash pull.
Yeah.
I think they got their awakened, or their tormented mom rather, in a little bit more quickly. Both teams though have also pulled trash over the wall into this pull.
Yes, and that's actually one of the most important things that you should highlight too. Is there have been different amounts of count that we've seen from varying teams of how much they want to pull over the wall. Perplexed yesterday had something around the range of like 72-ish% enemy forces count, where we saw the team of Evolving running that. They were getting up to 80% in multiple runs inside a mist. Did Team Name just hit the wrong wall? Look at Curry, he's laughing.
Oh, no.
Everybody's awkwardly like, oh no.
Uh-oh.
We've seen that a couple of times this weekend already.
That is not what you were hoping would happen, yeah. Well, that's going to help out for Perplexed here, as they are. You can see Ryson here. He's just kind of walking around to each of those totems and figuring out what the symbols are, and then putting down a world marker at which door is going to be the correct door to go through. That is very much the healer job in these sorts of pulls. You know, unless the Holy Paladin has a bunch of cooldowns, they're going to be the ones just kind of waddling around and figuring out the maze.
Yeah, and we did see Perplexed mess up their maze yesterday, so it definitely is something in the realm of possibility. But I think there are 12 paths for the maze, and after the first couple, you can quickly identify, and there are even some weak ores that will fully map out the maze after the first 2 or 3 doors.
It depends. Yeah, it depends on where you go, but sometimes you can have the whole rest of the maze sort of pathed out fairly quickly. Sometimes there's still variance all the way down towards the end. It just depends on which ones you've got. But definitely at this point, everybody's they've got all those possibilities identified, and they know how these things all affect them. And in particular, I mean, in Mist in particular, for teams like this, there's a lot of practice required to figure out how all of that should impact when you use your cooldowns versus which paths you want to try and save cooldowns for certain pulls. Right now, both are on this Night Blossom. You can see Perplex is just single target focusing it down.
Yeah.
Whereas Team Name have pulled trash into it. So that's going to be more count and a little bit more efficient damage, but Perplex are already in the next room of the maze instead.
They had the Night Blossom yesterday in their run. It may have been a different maze path, but they did have that Night Blossom in their run, and they elected to single target it down then too. I feel like, just for general MDI purposes, that normally looks so... it's so inefficient to just do that Night Blossom by itself, where Team Name is running the more conventional pull where they just do the most trash into it. Do you think that there would be an advantage to do that Night Blossom by itself, though?
Sometimes there's just you have single target stuff, like Shadow Blades if you're a subtlety rogue that's, it's not really a cooldown that's all that exciting in AoE, but it increases your single target by a really large amount. And so maybe you're just looking for a nice moment where, you can use single target cooldowns and let AoE cooldowns recover, and you're not kind of just waiting for stuff to come over the wall. As you can see, Perplexed already now getting into this boss room. There are some trash mobs you can pull over the wall, and yeah, you can see Wolf Disco heading over there to do exactly that, I believe, or at least they're cheating towards that side of the room. Let's see, are they? Yeah, they have grabbed some more friends. And they'll be bringing them in here. And this is actually a pretty big single target increase for a Shine as well. A Shine on that Subtlety Rogue does get to do what's called funnel damage, right? Where you get extra damage on your primary target by virtue of having other enemies nearby.
Yeah, and that's because of how Shuriken Storm works, right? Where every mob that's hit by the Shuriken Storm ends up giving you a combo point. So then you're able to just spam the Shuriken Storm as your builder and then just eviscerate as your main finisher straight into Mistcaller, right? Isn't that how that works?
That's
I'm no rogue expert, but
that's the theory. Unfortunately, sometimes then you have a monk in your group who's just spinning crane kicks all of your damage away. Very, very rude.
And how do you feel about the Holy Paladin AoEing while you're sitting there doing the ethical damage?
That's exactly what's happened here. Yeah, Shine has done some extremely ethical damage, and his reward for it is going to be a 4th or 5th place finish on the damage meters at the end of this one.
We are very upset with the Holy Paladin here. If we were the Subtlety Rogue, it's just, why do you have to DPS all of the AoE? Why not just let me funnel all of this and you sit there and do single target? Don't even look at my mobs. Those are for me, not for you.
Yeah. Wow, Team Name have actually done a good job of catching up here. So both teams at 72 or 73% count. It's going to mean they have basically identical pulls ahead of them in the dungeon. And both teams here do have Mistcaller within about 10% health of each other. So, wow, if Team Name didn't yeet themselves back to the start of the maze, I have a feeling that their maze route is like 20 seconds faster.
Yeah, and they are going to be getting their second guessing game of the fight here in just a moment, whereas Perplexed has already dealt with theirs. So they are something in the range of probably like, 30 seconds behind, if I had to guess. But that run back from hitting the wrong area of the maze is probably exactly what's going to cost them that.
Yeah, at this point, Perplexed, if they can hold on here, if they can avoid having any mistakes and they can just make a big pull work, I think that will be enough for them to just hit the gas and close out this game. But of course, there's still a lot left that can happen, as we will have a big trash pull before we get to the last boss. And that trash pull, there's a lot of mobs that, kind of contrary to how most of Shadowlands works, there are a lot of mobs in this upcoming area that don't individually do that much. But there are still several lethal abilities that you need to watch out for, right? Green swirlies, green puddles, green effects around your characters. Anything green in this next section needs to be avoided.
Yeah, and the main mobs here are these staghorns. These staghorns have a couple of different casts. One of them is just an AoE shield, and the other one is just a group-wide heal. And you need to rotate 2 melee kicks on those staghorns, and you will be good to go. You do see that one staghorn off to the right. Perplex is electing to shroud through that, though, because they don't want to be taking those mobs that far. And now, looking at this, all of these larvae that are in this area are those mobs that you were talking about, those mobs that don't really do a lot outside of just meleeing the tank. And from here on out, look at this. Perplex pull is pretty sizable, but they do have a little bit more trash to go before Tredova. And with Tredova, they're going to have Sagadon, who will make Divine take infinitely more physical damage.
Divine. On this last boss, everybody kind of takes some physical damage because you get fixated by the larva.
But what we've seen from Perplexed in the past is that they're pulling a lot of trash on top of Tredova, especially at the beginning of that, where Divine on that Prot Warrior, he's going to actually end up being pretty okay, even with that Sagadon debuff, because while he is taking more physical damage, it's just how block is very effective versus a debuff that is like that.
Yeah, Prot Warriors are pretty close to immune to physical damage as long as they have shield block up. But Divine doesn't have he's playing a damage legendary. He's not playing the infinite block up time legendary.
Ooh, interesting.
Reprisal. So he's actually playing the ancient aftershock legendary, which is huge damage, but it does mean he will have to carefully manage his defensives because he won't be able to maintain his shield block this whole time. You can see he's going to fire off the avatar here. It does have quite a bit of uptime, especially when you factor in Last Stand and Wall, which are available. But it's still something that he will have to worry about once all that does expire. He's hoping all the trash will be dead at that point, and he will only have to contend with boss autos. And if this is really carefully managed, he can even maybe have his shield block downtime come while the boss is channeling on that Gorm, thing in the middle of the room.
Ryson dropping a very unethical puddle, making sure that he, in fact, gets back into melee. He does not care about the remainder of his DPS. They're going to have to deal with some race car puddles coming out of Tredova in the next couple of phases. Team Name have also engaged Tredova and are trying to claw their way back, but without a mistake from Perplex, I don't know if they're going to be able to claw it back, Dratnos.
Yeah, I mean, this is such a good run out of Team Name, though, right? Like, this is going to be a 15-minute miss or something out of them against anybody else in this group. Oh my goodness,
This is fine.
Anda's under a tremendous amount of attack here. All of those tormented auras really ramping up the difficulty of this fight. But yeah, I mean, like I was saying, against any other group in this, or any other team in this group, I think this missed would not just look good, it would look great. It would look phenomenal out of Team Name. It's just you're up against Perplexed here, and Perplexed run is, I think, flawless. From what we've seen so far, there has yet to be anything you can really complain about from Perplexed side. Curry does go down for Team Name, and they're going to need to do an engineering res on him. It's kind of a pain to engineering res on this fight because you're all slowed. There's all these ground effects and swirlies you need to dodge, but they've been able to get that res off. It is going to be too little too late, though. As you can see, Tredova over on the side of Perplexed, sub 20% now. They've got all the count they need. So once that boss dies, the timer will stop, and they will win game 1 here up against Team Name. This has been a really impressive performance, though, from both teams.
Yeah, they were setting up this series to look absolutely excellent. Tredova's health falling a lot slower than I would have anticipated, although it is a tyrannical setting on here. They are going to be getting the last couple of percentage points off Tredova and are going to be going up 1-0.
There it is, sub 15-minute run by Perplexed. Team name not too far behind as well, like we mentioned. A very, very impressive run by both these teams. You can immediately start seeing here, Zyro, why both of them are in the upper finals.
Yeah, and I think it's important to mention that Miss is one of those dungeons in this bracket that really kind of exemplifies how skilled both of these teams are. The idea behind Miss this season is that we have it set so that the maze is random, but the same for both teams every time. So you can't really pre-plan out every CD. A lot of the calling in that maze section of the dungeon is kind of on the fly. So the really high-end teams are going to better be able to use their cooldowns to pull things. I think one of the major differences in this dungeon, however, is the fact that Perplexed actually was using that Codex of the First Technique trinket to pull things through the walls, whereas Team Name didn't have that tech. Lepan wasn't using that trinket, so they either had to use other means to get the things through the wall, like a hunter pet or something inefficient like that. And I think that kind of showed. The cooldown usages were just slightly better for Perplexed, and that eked out enough of an advantage for them to take this first dungeon.
To be using the hunter pet, it is a damage loss, but at the same time, it's not like Wolf Disco didn't have his pet out the whole entire time through the maze, right?
Sure, but I mean, it pulling other things is not ideal for your damage to the targets you're hitting, right?
Yeah, because you're dropping damage while you're also manipulating your pet, and you're splitting your focus and everything like that in different directions. But if your tank can just do all that work for you, then you're going to have like a much easier time to be able to deal with it. But otherwise, incredibly impressive here. And we were looking at, how these teams would start preparing Dratno, specifically on the side of Team Name, because we're saying, okay, this is #1 seed, Perplexed, a lot of favorability to it. Is Team Name going to just drill down on that lower final or in the lower bracket? But so far, I mean, they are well prepared, and they were ready to take it from Perplexed if they made the slightest hiccup.
Yeah, it does appear that Team Name has came to game. They are ready to try and take this series against Perplexed.
Is he allowed to do that?
It worked.
I'll allow it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Arbiter.
I'll take it.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Keep you two in line. Necrotic Wake going to be the next dungeon that we have upcoming here, Tettles. Fortified, bolstering, quaking, nastiness, right? The emphasis on single target damage to be able to also pull other mobs in and make sure you're avoiding bolstering. We've already seen teams, not these two, of course. We've already seen other teams having wipes and deaths galore to just too many bolsters on targets.
Yeah, and Necrotic Wake is the dungeon that has the highest volatility. It was the dungeon that had the highest volatility in Season 1, even, to the point where if you end up losing a weapon or you end up messing up just a little bit of a pull, you no longer have your cooldowns for it, or an even more permanent thing like I was talking about, the weapons. If you lose a javelin on something you expected to javelin, or the anima orb on something you expected to silence with that, then you are no longer able to do the same pulls that you were trying to do. And now with that dungeon being on that bolstering affix, that adds just an extra layer of complexity to the dungeon that these teams had to practice for, because a lot of the standard Necrotic Wake pulls involve, like, Blightbone is done with basically all of the trash in the courtyard, and you just like spear it, and then you end up just using all of your offensive CDs, use the anima exhaust on the boss as well, and you just deal with it that way. However, with it being bolstering, you have to take that whole entire area a lot more cautiously and a lot slower. And we even saw some teams yesterday bolster Blightbone, which that did cause some problems.
Yeah, and nobody likes to get one shot by his frontal or anything like that, or just have your tank get absolutely clobbered, right? There's also just the extra HP that they have to worry about. The fight starts taking longer, the ads just continue spawning and everything, and it causes a lot of problems. And we were looking at, in particular, Zyro, as to dungeons that are considered more easy can also be extremely hard for something like MDI versus live keys, because you have to take such great risks to be faster than your opponent.
Yeah, in addition to that, I think Necrotic Wake is one of those dungeons that's simple but hard in that same vein, because it was pretty much solved last season. Teams figured out what the super efficient routes were, where to use weapons, so the strategy is pretty much known by everyone. It's all down to execution at this point, and when you talk about execution, Perplexed is up there with the best of them, so Team Name really has it cut out for them here to not go down 2-0 in this series. If we're judging just based off of fastest times in this tournament alone, Perplexed easily has a 25-second advantage. Now, Team Name's run wasn't perfect. They had 2 deaths, so maybe they could make up some of that time in this run. It could be extremely close, but obviously I think I still have to favor Perplexed here.
I really think it's going to come down to consistency, though. Yeah, like we're talking about, Perplexed didn't have any mistakes in their Necrotic Wake run, so they had the absolute most clean... what are you laughing about, Syra?
Nothing. I'm not laughing.
Okay.
I'm just smiling.
We'll tell you
I
later.
see.
Don't worry, Titles.
He'll tell me when I'm older. Is it one of those situations? But I do think that Team Name has been hyping up their Necrotic Wake a lot too, and so I do wonder if they've gone back in there and have revised their route just a little bit to the point where it could be in the realm of theoretically faster.
Yeah, that's always a possibility. I mean, we're looking, for example, at that Mists, and we were saying, okay, if there's any sort of mistake on the side of Perplexed, Team Name's right there to swoop in. So maybe this is a dungeon that's going to be a lot stronger for them. Because keep in mind, what do they have to lose at this point besides dropping down to a lower bracket and going after and having a little bit of time to practice for that other matchup, right? They have that little bit of safety net, and if they can guarantee it now, I mean, we've seen time and time again, the team that goes to the finals first, Ratnos, almost always wins the finals at the end.
Yeah, we've seen a couple of lower bracket, runs being upsets, but usually it is the case that it is a huge advantage to be that first team through the upper bracket. You just get to kind of sit back, watch the other teams, practice your runs, identify which of the dungeons in those finals are going to be the ones you need to practice the most, and then just do that. That's a huge advantage, and definitely whichever of the teams wins this series is going to be very, very happy about it. They're also just going to be really happy to have already earned that ticket to the Global Finals. That is, I think, the biggest thing that is at stake here for both of these teams. Perplexed, definitely the favorites at this point, but yeah, like you were saying, Team Name clearly are within range where it's like, it's not even a full wipe. Like one slightly scuffed pull from Perplexed, and bang, Team Name are right there, right at the same time as them. Yeah,
and that's one of the biggest, misnomers as well with looking at, okay, is it going to be a 2-0? Is it going to be, 2-1 or something like that? Even if it goes to a 2-0 or something, if they keep it close the same way they've been doing thus far, it's a lot closer than the scoreboard would actually lend itself to be. And when it comes to getting ready for the Global Finals and everything, Zyro, a lot of emphasis for either of these teams to get that first seed going into Globals. That way they could potentially dodge Echo or some of the other insane teams that we have in later groups.
Yeah, exactly. That's something we haven't really touched on too much. We've been super hyper-focused on top 2 teams make it into Global Finals, but yeah, you've got a point there. Winning your cup bracket puts you up against the second seed from another bracket, so you give yourself a much more favorable advantage in theory, I guess, if teams like Echo...
nobody's going to be easy in the Global Finals. Exactly. Nobody's going to be an easy opponent when we get there, but if you're not going against the defending champs, well, that's pretty good. Let's get into it, though. Playing for that spot in our finals and our qualifier for Globals. Necrotic Wake gets going.
Yeah, we got mirrored comps again. It looks like it's very interesting that these teams have put in just so much practice on their own, and it is the first cup weekend, but they come up to the same conclusion in terms of what comps they want to be running inside of 2 dungeons back to back like this. Oh my gosh, the Inferno just went off on Arcoleth.
Somehow they're alive there. It's going to be a cheat death, but nothing else needs to be committed by Team Name. Wow, that was incredible.
Another?
Oh my goodness, another cast has gone off.
This has to be intense.
How? Okay, Lepan and Curry and Mikkel and Anda and Igloo are all on the floor now.
You just list their whole team.
Well, I was listing the people that were dying, and as I started listing it, more of them started dying, so had to just keep doing it and read out the whole team name, as it were.
It's... I think the first Arcoleth kick was intentional to go off because they had the barrier down. I'm not so sure about that second one, as the barrier was no longer down.
I doubt that either was intentional. It seems to me that it's hard to find a more high-value kick than Inferno, in terms of just how much damage you're mitigating with that kick button. That is going to be rough for Team Name, as they now are going to be without all of their big cheat death options, and they have to restart this bolstering pull from scratch. I mean, it's hard to call it over just this early into the dungeon, but at this point, Team Name have lost so many minutes because they are going to have to do all the same trash they were going to do already, but instead of being able to do it in one pull, they're going to have to split it up into 2 or 3, and they lost their reses, and they've just lost so much here.
They probably lost something in the magnitude of 5 minutes. lost an absolutely insurmountable amount of time just by messing up that first pull. Because, yeah, it's all of that stuff like you were talking about. They also lost the Incinerator, too. Something in the range of 10% enemy forces are gone. Perplexed is now killing off Blightbone with some of this trash that they have off to the side. You see the Anima Exhaust pulsating on that whole entire thing, and they do a great job of dealing with Necrotic. And so if you're on the side of Team Name, you have to just pray for an absolutely massive blunder for Perplexed if you want Team Name to be able to get back into this.
Yeah, the good news is that Incinerator is already low health. It is it is something that does not regenerate its health when you reset it. So that is a little mercy on the side of Team Name that will help them catch a tiny bit back up. But yeah, Perplexed at this point, 20% enemy forces, 1 boss, 5 deaths ahead of where Team Name are at. I mean, that is a huge advantage, but Necrotic Wake is a very volatile dungeon. There are a lot of dangerous pulls left in here, and a lot of them that can be as costly, if not more, if Perplexed were to have something go wrong. So if you're a Team Name fan, that is exactly what you're hoping is going to happen here. You're going to hope that this pull, you're going to hope the next big pull, which is one of the scariest pulls in all of Shadowlands Mythic Plus, right? That big pull onto the Bone Storm guy, that can cause a lot of
Bone
damage,
Reaver.
and then especially once you get into the Necropolis as well. That is a place you can lose so much time, especially if pulls where you commit weapons end up not working out, and then you just don't have a weapon when you come back to it.
Team Name's being spawn camped.
Yeah, this
So
is,
bad for them.
this is unfortunate over on the right-hand side of the screen here. Team Name all committing their Shadow Melts to try and get out of this one. They will be siphoning this Anima, getting a little bit more powerful, but at this point, we're going to switch our focus here to Perplexed run, as they have, I would say, probably close to 7 minutes of advantage built up in the first 3.5 minutes of this dungeon. Which is an impressive rate. It's an impressive rate of time to build up.
Agree. Oh, Team Name is now engaged Blightbone, but on the big screen, we have Perplexed with those
This
Anima
pull.
Exhaust pulsing. Yeah, this is one of the most dangerous pulls. This is the one that you were highlighting, the one with the Bone Storm guy. And look at this. All three of their DPS are over 60k, with their tank also at a nice balmy 55k DPS.
Oh, a Shine fighting for that 3rd place spot on the meters, needs to beat the tank or else will be deeply embarrassed. Has done it. Ooh, it was close for a while there, but all 3 DPS players are going to make the top 3 of the damage meter here for Perplexed. They have done a great job of making that pull look so easy, but trust me, it is not an easy pull at all. Most people on the live servers will not pull that mini boss with the pull of that size, and it is still scary even without that.
A Shine quickly calling out, check mini boss damage, nerds. I was at the top.
Yeah, check boss damage.
He's talking about the relevant metrics here. He's not talking about those pad metrics that you guys are all focused on.
Exactly. That's the problem when you put and then you go into this poll, right? And you'd be like, oh, where are you guys now? You know, where's all that damage
Look at me
now? Yeah.
And he also carries all their weapons, so it's just going to prop him up at overall. He's going to tell them to check overall after the run.
All right, so Perplexed are going to be moving into the boss now with the, looks like Swag here has deployed a spear, dealing quite a lot of damage. That may in fact have just been a hammer.
It's very hard to tell. The
is.
javelins, so typically you're going to javelin Varuth whenever Varuth hits like the 30 to 40% mark with Amarth, and you're going to line those 2 things up to be able to execute Varuth and then just deal a considerable amount of damage to Amarth. However, that's something that people do on live realms. With the MDI, it's very so the javelin is capped, and its cap is it's like a pretty steep cap. It's after 5 targets it starts to do reduced damage to any additional targets that are gained. So it's not always the best thing for an MDI style situation. So using it on Executioner and Amarth there does make more sense than just slamming a hammer.
Yeah, getting good spears later in this dungeon, particularly on the last 2 bosses, is really, really valuable. So that requires taking them off of some of these earlier bosses, which, you know, these bosses are scary. They're certainly scary, but it's a little bit less time efficient to be spearing these bosses than to be spearing those kind of phased bosses, right? The second to last boss in this dungeon, every time you spear it, if you can skip one of those hook phases, that's going to save you a lot of time. And the last boss, you know, the shorter you can make that fight, the less total health you have to burn through, because the less shields it's casting.
Yeah, and so now a mark does go down for Perplexed. At the other side, we see team name has dealt with Blightbone, I think.
All right. They're on the board.
It's looking like they've dealt with Blightbone, although I'm not 100% sure. And now Perplexed is making their way into the Necropolis. This is arguably the final pain point of this dungeon for Perplexed. They just need to make sure that their first and second pull in this area is dealt with very clean. And you're going to see Perplexed is going to be grabbing this patrol with this corner pack. And on bolstering, this is very dangerous. And this is one of the things that they have to commit a bunch of weapons to and use all of their offensive CDs to be able to deal with. And you see Divine sitting at 50k DPS. He's popping one of those anima orbs to be able to silence all the mobs.
Shine is really the unsung hero of pulls like this because he is going to be doing so much of that priority damage to the big Stitchworks and stuff. In this particular pull, he's also going to be a sung hero because he's fired off one of the weapons, right, and is doing huge overall from that weapon. But in terms of where his class damage is actually going here, it's primarily focused on those priority targets. Swag is going to go down here for Perplexed, though. That is, I think, their first death of the series, and it's not going to cost them too much.
Battle resing.
Yeah, the battle res is going to come out. They're going to stop this Fleshcrafter from getting any more cleaver casts, and they don't have any battle reses now for another 2 minutes, so that will be an important thing. If you were constructing a way that they were going to be able to lose this map, it would certainly involve losing that battle res, and then something going horribly awry without killing much of anything in this pull, for instance.
It's so interesting to me that they're playing like they're not 10 minutes ahead right now. That committal of that battle res is them saying, because where Swag would release is just in the Amarth room, and he's one quick angel ride away of getting back into the party. And by committing that battle res, they're saying, we don't need this. We're playing and practicing like this is going to be us in a live match. And you look at Ryson on the screen too. He's mind controlling that one Fleshcrafter, and now you see the boss is starting to do the RP, and he's going to start spawning some more of this trash. They're going to be using this Fleshcrafter later on to be able to do additional damage to the boss and just additional damage to some of the other trash pulls.
No, Swag was targeted by one of them and then ends up rolling around the other way because he had the wrong one kind of in his head as Vicom was targeting him.
We've been there.
Yeah, that does happen to all of us. Luckily, as a monk, you have more than enough mobility tools there. And like you were saying, that mind control tech is really the primary reason that you do see priests so prevalently in this dungeon. It is so much value to be able to just mind control the Fleshcrafter and have the boss start this gauntlet. And then you get to have that Fleshcrafter for the last two bosses. So Perplexed really going to make good use of that. And almost every team we see in this dungeon will be playing a priest for that reason.
Exactly. And it just makes sense that it's the healing priest. While Shadow is incredibly good, we've seen Shadow in a few other dungeons. This is a dungeon where you want the Frost Mage as opposed to the Fire Mage, and so Shadow Priest is just slightly less valuable in the exact same way. And Disc brings exactly what you need, whether that be that PI to assist the rest of your party, and at the same time you just need that mind control.
Yeah, that is another nice thing they do is they get to bring your Kyrian buff if your tank doesn't want to play Kyrian.
True.
Not an issue in this dungeon, though, because Divine, delighted to be playing Kyrian Vengeance Demon Hunter, but, in some dungeons the tanks aren't playing stuff that is as interested in being Kyrian, right? Sometimes they want to be a warrior, they want to play Night Fae, that sort of thing instead.
Jack's secretly hoping that anybody will bust out a Holy Priest.
Yeah, the Holy Priest. We've seen 3 different healing specs so far this tournament.
We've seen the Restoration Shaman. However, we do know that JB during time trials played that Kyrian Restoration Druid, and that may end up making an appearance at some point. It just kind of depends. I think that from what I've understood from how people have explained it, that Kyrian Restoration Druid in that The Other Side time trial map was just kind of a perfect storm of circumstances. And in addition to that, JB loving that Resto Druid, being able to bust it out with that perfect storm.
Yeah, of course, we haven't seen their team playing this weekend yet because of our new structure, right? We have 24 teams that qualified through our time trials, and only 8 of them are playing this weekend. Another 8 playing next weekend. That's going to include Complexity and JB's team. And then another 8, the last 8, will be on the final weekend, 2 weekends from now. So it's pretty cool. It's pretty exciting new format that means that there's going to be some new teams, all new teams, in fact, every single weekend.
They 5-man melded, dropped that Fleshcrafter out of combat, and reset the bolstering on that whole entire thing. So that's something that we've seen. Okay, we've seen group-wide 5-player or 5-team melds pretty commonly in the MDI so far, and not this.
Look at the world markers.
Yeah,
I love this.
I wonder who that's directed at and who they're BMing specifically at this current moment.
Yeah, that's got to be the kind of thing where like you had one world marker down and somebody missed it, so you put 2 down and they miss it again, and you're like, all right, we're going all out. There's no way.
It's a oh goodness, it's just a. Oh, did they just grab the Fleshcrafter with the hook instead of the boss? That morbid fixation is still stuck chasing around
Swag. Does
Swag.
take an auto.
This is bad
right,
because they're not going to be able to get Stitch Flesh down. Oh, they're committing weapons to it right now. And look at this, Wolf Disco blinking into position, trying to get that extra hook, but Surgeon Stitch Flesh is going to spawn another abomination here in just a moment, and this can start to get dicey for Perplexed. They may need to commit some more weapons, and maybe even a Bloodlust if they're not careful.
And they're overlapping pain suppression and meta here, the Fell Devastation meta from Divine, so he's going to be very tanky for a little bit, but once those things expire,
another weapon.
There's not going to be too much left. So yeah, they are going to use a lot of stuff here to take out Surgeon Stitch Flesh before it takes them out. That does mean that this last boss will take them a little bit longer than if they'd been able to preserve those weapons, but you know what? They should still be able to get it done. It is going to be a little bit of a slower, in theory, strat, but it absolutely needed to happen with the way that all worked out. So good adaptation from Perplexed as they now move on to this last boss with 2 Tormented Auras active. They are slowed and they are taking extra physical damage right now.
Yeah, and while this is very scary, they do bring that Fleshcrafter with them that is going to help them just do a tremendous amount of damage to Nalthor. Nalthor is absolutely being melted here by using some of those weapons that are in Necrotic Wake with the addition of that Fleshcrafter Cleaver. The Fleshcrafter Cleaver is the best use of that is actually whenever somebody goes down and has to deal with their phase downstairs on that Dark Exile. Ooh, Ryson was able to grab Wolf Disco right before he got gripped by that Dark Exile, allowing him to stay up on top of the platform for 40 seconds. You do see on Wolf Disco's frame that he has that green debuff, and after 40 seconds occurs, he will just die, but it's looking like Nalthor is going to die before Wolf Disco ends up perishing.
Wow, that is a huge time save that Perplexed have done here, and that is an incredibly useful thing if they come up in this match, in this map against another team, but they are done with this series. This is going to be a 2-0 victory for Perplexed in a stunning fashion in Necrotic Wake, sub 15 minutes in this dungeon as well, and they have earned the first ticket to the Global Finals.
Hopefully Wolf is able to get that town portal there before he perishes.